This week, Paul and I interview Chris Elgee, technical engineer at Counter Hack Challenges. In the news, Kubernetes instances are being hijacked around the world. Google is on a witch hunt for internal leakers, and malicious sites are abusing an 11-year-old bug in Firefox. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 43, our 44th episode of Application Security Weekly. I'm, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlet, and I'm excited to be joined once again by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian.
What's going on, Keith, and all of you Application Security Weekly listeners?
Hey, not a lot. Dude, that Patriots game yesterday, though, oof. Like, what
I didn't
a loss.
watch it.
Oh, what? Good.
I had other things
Good.
going on, and I was going to watch the recording, and what everyone told me is don't bother.
Yep. Nope. Yeah. If you live in New England, you probably were pretty disappointed by that. One quick announcement before we get into our interview. If you are interested in quality over quantity and having a meaningful conversation instead of just badge scans, join us April 1st to the 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019, where you can connect and network with like-minded individuals in search of actionable information. Use the registration code OS19-SecWeek for 15% off the main conference or World Pass. With that, Chris is a technical engineer at Counter Hack Challenges, as well as a plans and policies officer in the Massachusetts Army National Guard G6. Chris is a full-time husband, father of 4, as well as a SANS community instructor, and again, as I said before, part-time Army officer, as well as a backup church bass player. Interesting. He held certifications, small amounts of cash, and a grudge against the EPA inspector who shut down the Ghostbusters containment unit. Chris Elgee, welcome to Application Security Weekly.
Thank you so much, Keith. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So I got to ask, there was once a Ghostbusters containment unit?
Yeah, back in the 80s. Funny story, actually. The guy who played the EPA inspector for months would walk around the city, New York City, and get dirty looks from people because they associated him with the character from the movie.
That's really funny.
No, really. That's too funny. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, Chris, you and I met at DerbyCon earlier this year, where you had a talk on building Burp Suite Pro modules to identify bugs. Specifically, the talk was called Burping Better, Finding Threats Vulnerabilities with Burp Extensions. So I was actually hoping to have you talk a little bit about, first, your experience with building the Burp extension. Of course, that is a kind of an adventure into itself, but also what got you into the whole process to begin with in terms of, like, why did you build it? What did you build as kind of an outcome? And of course, what did you find?
Yeah, so I guess maybe we'll start with the why, and that's something I call false negative anxiety. I don't think this is unique to pen testers. I've heard of forensicators that have the same issue where you think maybe there's something out there but you can't find it, and then you're really worried for your client that maybe you missed it. So Struts is one of those things for me where maybe I'm afraid it's out there, maybe I'm afraid that they're vulnerable to it, and I want to make sure I can find it. So I wanted to have some easy, even automatic way to check for it while I'm doing a penetration test.
Gotcha. Awesome. And so, with that, maybe going back a little bit as well for our listeners. So, obviously, you've got the ability to build a tool because you have and you've built the Burp plugin for this. How did you get started in, I guess, web application security assessments? Was it part of your role within the Army? Was it part of previous work that you've done in the past? Like, where did you get started with that? And then from there, tell us a little bit about your adventures in learning to build the Burp tool.
Yeah, thanks. So, uh, for a long time, I was active duty with the National Guard as an Army guy, and I did a bit of red teaming and that kind of thing. But I really had the bug to go and be a full-time pen tester. So, a company right local here in Maine, Sage Data Security, they gave me that opportunity, and as part of regular duties, uh, involved a lot of web app pen testing. So, got into doing that kind of thing. Got interested actually in some of the struts bugs by playing the 2017 holiday hack. I thought it was really cool. It was a neat way to get a shell on somebody else's web server. So it got me thinking about how I can find that in clients' environments. So I thought through a bunch of different ways to do it, because there are plenty of Python scripts out there that will look for specific vulnerabilities if you give them a vulnerable URL. But I needed something more kind of all encompassing. So I'd really fallen in love with Burp Suite Pro. It's a great web app testing tool, and as you're going through it, it spiders out your whole site, right? It's got a full listing of every URL that you've seen on it, so that when you want to run a scan for something, it can just hit every single URL that you and the tool are aware of. So that's one kind of, I don't want to say surefire way, but it's a much more reliable way than just random Python script firings. I had no idea how to program an extension for Burp. As far as I knew, it was all Java, and Java's kind of gross, and I didn't want to do any of that. But a coworker of mine, a guy named Andrew Sylvia, said, "Hey, just code it, start with something." So I actually started with an open source plugin that was already out there called ActiveScan++, something written by a web app wizard, James Kettle, and sort of modeled what I needed to do after what he had, and then incorporated pieces of those Python scripts, so that each time I checked the URL, it would run checks for each of these things. And then while I was in there, I also added a check for XXE vulnerabilities via post, because that's something that you see every once in a while. And it's something that when you think to test for it, it's not hard to do, but you don't always think of it. So I wanted to be part of that automatic methodology I had in pen testing.
So as you were building out the tool and kind of iterating on making sure that it worked well, did you set up kind of local test environments that were vulnerable to this as part of maybe your test suite to confirm that the tool you were building was working the way that you wanted to? How did you actually kind of go through the rigor of making sure you were finding the vulnerabilities that you intended to be looking for as part of that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So that involves really finding vulnerable VMs or Docker instances or whatever I could get, loading them up in VMware on the laptop, and just firing these tests at each of these instances, seeing what gets caught in each of them, and having a good feel for what comes back in terms of output, so that I know I'm catching it when it's actually there. And a lot of that actually, I got to thank the Burp Collaborator tool. It's a neat sort of external server that sits outside your test box and the client machine, to be a kind of a catcher of external interactions, so that when you're firing something at a client site that has, say, external DNS interaction, or to look up a web page, that collaborator page reports back to you that you've got that successful code execution.
Now, in terms of testing as well, did you ever find that you had instances of maybe false positives that came back and you're like, I know that shouldn't be vulnerable, but it's telling me it is. I know that that's one of those things as well. Again, as security professionals, the false negative is, of course, one of those looming things that you always worry about, because if someone ends up getting hacked by it, later, it kind of comes back to bite you. But I know that from a developer side, false positives is kind of the bane of their existence. And I just don't, I don't know if during your test suite you found that, hey, wait a minute, this actually shouldn't be vulnerable, but it's saying it is.
Actually, I had the good fortune of not having any false positive issues with it. The way the check and collaborator work are, each time it sends a payload that might be triggering command execution, there's a unique identifier to it, so that when the tester's Burp Suite app pulls the collaborator, it looks for each of those IDs. And unless one of those IDs has passed through your client web server up to the collaborator, then it won't ring a false positive.
Nice. And so with the check for the struts vulnerabilities, did you also incorporate the one that came out more recently this year as well? Again, like just before DerbyCon, maybe a month or so before, or was this more for the one that came out last year that also hit Equifax?
Yeah, great question. So there've been a few of them, and we don't need to go through the CVE numbers, but there was, basically, yeah, the Equifax one was the first really well-known one, and there was already a check in ActiveScan++ for that one. So I added one for the two subsequent flavors of remote code execution, one of which was from the 17 holiday hack, and then got that up and running. And then after the tool was published on GitHub, and this, by the way, was my first contribution to anything on GitHub, so it was kind of a new experience too. Um, the new one came out; it was like a 11,000 series number, and someone posted in the project, "Hey, is this going to be able to be caught by this plugin as well?" So I think, cool, people are actually using it, and hey, this is an easy thing to add in. So added it in, and then James Kettle approved it, and poof, it's part of the tool now.
That's awesome. That's totally awesome. Now, you've been mentioning it a couple of times, and I don't know whether or not much of our audience is familiar with the holiday hack challenges. Can you, for example, last year's, can you talk a little bit more as to what that is and how you got into it and maybe where it lives as well? Because I know that you've also got some announcements or some things that you can talk a little bit about at a high level coming up this week.
Yeah, so before I got into working for Counter Hack Challenges, I was a big fan of this game they make every year called the Holiday Hack Challenge. And from 2015, 16, and 17, I played through each of them completely, submitted answers at the end, and what each of them are these kind of series of hacking challenges modeled around a story, modeled around a game. Where our chief Ed Scotus, he comes up with some scenario where Christmas is threatened and Santa needs help of the hacking community to come and figure out what's going on. And it's not just pen testy stuff. There's all kinds of there's always some forensics. There's absolutely some application security stuff, and it's a neat game where you can go and learn things and then see what other people come up with at the end. And most of the time, too, in most years, there'll be an online environment where you can walk around and chat with other players at the same time. So a really fun way to learn, and it's actually been used in at least one college course as their curriculum because just 1 year's challenges will be enough to fill a semester of a class.
That's awesome. Now, with the 2017 Holiday Hack Challenge, there was a lot based on Node, and if I recall correctly, also a bit of Docker as well. What were kind of the big technologies that you found were really interesting, especially again as you were scaling up for this? Any particular challenges in there that for the 2017 challenge you really enjoyed?
Yeah, the one that really caught my attention, of course, was the struts vulnerability because it's always neat when you can get a shell on somebody's web server, right? It's fun to do an internal test where you can hop around from system to system, but usually on external tests there isn't as much of the juicy stuff there. So when you get something like that where you can get a C prompt on someone else's machine, that's great. So to hit most of the challenges in 17, you actually had to have command execution on this one external facing server, and then that had an internal interface that would let you pivot through to touch more of the internal system. So that one definitely caught my attention. But the Docker stuff is neat too. It's a good way to kind of build a challenge that's set around a Linux terminal where maybe there's some specific objective to find a file or to change something or to figure out what happened, and it's all contained in a little stateless a Docker terminal.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, for this year, I know that I don't want you to give it away per se, but what has it been like transitioning from being a player hacker to a developer at CounterHack? Are there any kind of like what's the day to day like? I can only imagine it's kind of like being elves in Santa's workshop, as it were.
Yeah, it's kind of magical and awesome. I mean, on the one hand, it's a little disappointing to not be able to play. In fact, last year I included the whole family in my submission. My answer wasn't just like a technical write up. It was actually a parody of "Baby It's Cold Outside," and my wife and I sang it, put it to music, and made a video with the kids. So when I told the kids I had this cool new job, their first question was, "Well, do we still get to play the holiday hack?"
Oh,
The answer is, well
they
yeah,
do.
we can,
You
but
don't.
we have no chance of winning now.
right. They're disqualified from winning, but they can still play.
Absolutely. The oldest is 9, and he's starting to get interested, and he's actually done a little bit of Python coding. So that's exciting. Warms my heart.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Now, for this year, are there any maybe tips or tricks that you can give? I know, again, I don't want you to give it away, so if you can't, no pressure. But just curious to know.
Yeah, this one I will tell you, there's a lot to this one. I think each year the team tries to be more and more ambitious, and this year is no exception. Um, yeah, to answer a different question, let me just say that the day to day is it's neat. I mean, it's high, it's kind of high pressure, but not that like not that Ed or CounterHack or Sans is putting pressure on us, but just we want this to be an outstanding product. And we want everybody to enjoy it and learn a lot from it. So, we have, here getting close to launch, we've got meetings every day, even through this past weekend, just checking on everything, making sure that the issues are getting solved, that all the features are in. Because again, we want it to be something awesome that people get a kick out of. And if I haven't mentioned it, by the way, also it is completely free, and there are a couple of good prizes, including 2 Sans classes.
That's awesome. Now, beyond just the holiday hack challenge as well. So what other sort of things? And I know the answer to this, but what other sort of things does Counter Hack actually do? Because Ed, being who he is very well known in the Sans community for Sans training. But what other sorts of things does Counter Hack actually put together through the rest of the year? Because I imagine that there will be people listening that say, hey, wait a minute, we've got training budget coming up in 2019, and they might want to participate in things beyond the holiday hack challenge.
Yeah, and obviously we've got a hand in the whole pen test curriculum, working with that as we do. But one of the one of the main products that we put out actually is Net Wars. So once Santa's all set with us, once CrinkleCon is off and running, we'll be able to get back to that. I'm looking especially at Net Wars Core Tournament, trying to build the next version of that. Jeff McJunkin has built the last couple, and they've been great fun. If somebody goes to a Sans conference now and plays Net Wars Core Tournament, they'll play Jeff's vision, the Star Wars Net Wars, where again it's a big collection of challenges. There's some forensics, some defense, AppSec stuff, and pen testing, where students can come and try those skills out. So Net Wars is a big thing. Some smaller projects too, like Cyber City, Net Wars Continuous, and we also do pen testing as well. We have some really neat clients on the pen testing side, but Ed will tell you we mostly do that just to get better ideas for hacking challenges.
I love it. I love it. Paul, do you have additional questions as well?
I don't.
Awesome. Awesome.
Ed's also coming on the show next week or
Thursday,
right?
This
Thursday, this week, to talk about it. So, well, we may get some more information, but mostly we'll just get kind of color and style and things like that. Not necessarily more information, but it'll be fun.
Awesome. So with that, unless there's any other additional questions, are you ready for Application Security Weekly's 5 questions?
I think I am, Keith.
Awesome. So first of all, what were the specs like on your first computer?
I should have looked this up. My first computer was an Apple IIgs. I'm sure it had like kilobytes of RAM, but it was a pretty sweet machine that I was fortunate to have.
And then, of course, when you were on your Apple IIgs, or maybe sometime shortly thereafter, may it rest in peace, what programming language did you learn first?
Yeah, it came with a book for AppleSoft Basic, so that was the first thing I learned. I remember there was kind of a trick to getting to a prompt where you could start coding things. Like you couldn't just kids. It didn't have a hard drive; it only booted off floppies. So you'd have to boot up something else like Lemonade Stand or whatever, and then kind of exit out to get to program a little bit. But yeah, AppleSoft Basic was my first language.
And so today, is it Python? Are there any other additional languages that you're playing with as well, or is kind of Python the go-to?
Yeah, mostly it's Python 3 right now. Yep.
Gotcha. And then, of course, pulling you into the holy wars. First, Vim or Emacs, or VI, I guess.
I'm ashamed to say this, but I'm really kind of a nano guy. Sorry.
Well, that ends the. No, just kidding. Well, honestly, if it's a tool that works for you, then hey, by all means, right? I'm a Visual Studio Code guy, but that's because I'm using Vim key bindings in it. So I don't know. The next one, though, is very important regardless. Spaces or tabs?
Yeah, so I actually prefer tabs, but most programs I'm working with already have spaces in them because I'm editing somebody else's stuff. So I've just kind of grown to using spaces, but I like doing 2 at a time, not 4, because I feel like it just gets too stretched out with 4 spaces every time.
JavaScript developers would welcome you with open arms. Like the two spaces is definitely a JavaScript convention that I've seen. And for me, I'm a four spaces guy, and it's like, this is unreadable. And then I have to go in and format everything. It's a mess. So,
Regex will help
of
you,
course,
right?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Regex will help you, right? You can set it to whatever you want.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Find, replace, or the auto editing, stylized things that they have plugins for. I just let it do its magic. Last thing though, and especially given your pen testing background, Chris, what sort of advice would you give to newcomers in the industry?
I think the biggest thing really is just to find something you're interested in and play with it. One of the things that I know a lot of employers ask is, what does your home lab look like, right? If you don't have an answer to that, then I think it shows that you're not terribly interested in what you're doing, and maybe it's just more of a job for you. And most of us in this field who've been in it for any amount of time really love it, and we want to bring more people into the field who are excited about it. So I think just play and have your own home lab.
I couldn't agree more. Most of our listeners know the story where I brought pictures of my server rack that was in my mom's living room, where I was living still at home at the time, and it was all like Sun systems and SGI systems and stuff.
Absolutely.
So I know we have a little bit extra time, and usually I ask the 5 questions last, but it's funny that you mentioned the home lab, because that is actually the first question I almost always ask all the people that I talk to on interviews, is what your home lab is like. And since we have a few extra minutes, Chris, what does your home lab look like? Like, what do you got going on these days?
Top secret now.
Actually, if the webcam reached, and it almost would, I'd show you. It's just around the corner, but it kind of evolves. It's had a Cisco 2800 series router in it. Right now, it's running pfSense on a little box. I've got an old 1U server that actually has a floppy drive in it that I play with sometimes. Most of what I use now is just living in VMware, and it's everything from different Linux builds to a couple of Windows Server instances, just because that's easy and I can bring it with me anywhere and keep playing with it. So. And then also I had a security onion box because I think it's neat to do packet capture on your own network and see that your cameras are actually reaching out to Hong Kong and Turkey. But I needed a Plex server, so that's been repurposed. But I hope to bring security onion back.
Chris, it's funny you say that. My security onion box was repurposed last week as well.
For Plex, or
no, not for a lot of my lab is now here at the studio, so it's like one of our Zoom machines now. It's really boring. It runs Windows now. It's terrible.
Basically, he sacrificed it for the greater good.
I did. I had to sacrifice it for the greater good. So
we are able to deliver these podcasts to everyone based on Paul's sacrifices.
That's right. That's right. Always new stuff, hardware and stuff, that we get our hands on. So repurposing some other stuff.
And with that, we are going to take a short break and then come back with the news. Stay tuned.